The chair now recognizes Ms. Stansbury from New Mexico for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to start by saying, in the words of Taylor Swift, this is going to be a cruel summer if this is going to be our song. Having hearings like this on a death by 1,000 cuts, talking about deregulating the very programs that protect our families and communities. But seriously, don't blame me. I have to say that I knew this was trouble when I walked in. But we know this game all too well. Our friends across the aisle call for deregulation of companies and deregulation of fundamental public health, safety, environmental rules, but yet they want to regulate our bodies. They want to regulate who we love. They want to regulate the kind of books we can read, and they want to regulate the identities of our children's and their lives. Obviously, this is nothing new. But let's talk about the dangers of deregulation if we want to talk about deregulation today. Let's talk about the Trump decision to deregulate banks, which helped to contribute to the recent failure of multiple banks. Let's talk about the deregulation of the transportation sector that led to the disaster and train derailment in East Palestine. Let's talk about the deregulation being pushed right here in this body this week over gun stabilizing braces on the very anniversary of the deadly shooting of the Pulse nightclub in Florida. And let's talk about the failure of this body to regulate the safe use of firearms that has led to countless shootings and our communities and kids fearing for their lives. And let's talk about the deregulation of the oil and gas sector that happened during the Bush administration that led to the largest oil spill ever in the history of the world in the Deepwater Horizon spill in the Gulf. Long story short, this kind of deregulation is not only dangerous, it's treacherous. And it costs, as my colleague said, human lives, threatening the health and safety of our communities. Ms. Katzen, we have been here a long time this morning, and you have shared a lot about your views, but I feel like much of this conversation has been muddied by the comments that we've heard from our colleagues. So I want to give you, we're at the end of this hearing, really the final word to help explain to the American people, why do we have regulations? Why are they essential to protect the health and safety of our communities, as well as our democracy and the functioning of our institutions? And can you please explain the rigor with which, as a former OMBer, that these regulations are drafted, reviewed, and put into place?
Well, thank you very much for that question. First, there's the misnomer. Regulations is not one thing. There are lots and lots of different kinds. You can have, we're coming up to tax, or we just passed tax day. If tax day is on April 15th, falls on a Saturday, you're not going to file your taxes until the following Monday. That's done by extending the time. That's done by regulation. Who can complain about that? Or if there's an America's Cup race on the West Coast and you want to protect the little boats that are racing from the big ships that are coming in, you set a course. You do that by regulations. No one can complain about that. Those are kinds of things in our lives that are straightforward, that are honest, that lead us to lead an orderly life. Now, there are some big ticket items, and these are the things that people get very agitated about. But on the big ticket items, what happens is a very long process. It can take a year, but more likely 2, 3, or 4 years for the staff to develop the science, the technology, to put out a notice of proposed rulemaking that invites comments from those who will benefit by the rule and those who will be burdened by it. Those comments are reviewed carefully, thoughtfully, and they're reportedly determined to see whether this makes sense. And then the rule will be going through OIRA review, which also looks at the economics. Is this going to have more benefits than costs?
Thank you, Ms. Katzen. We are running short on time, but I think it's essential to punctuate this final point. And as somebody who worked at OMB, perhaps one of the only members sitting up here on the dais who has actually worked on regulations and understands the process, they go through extensive review. They include public review. They include a process that looks at the economic impacts. And those who are regulated are not untouchable. And in fact, if we do not have common sense regulations, this is why we cannot have nice things. And with that, I yield
Time is
back.
expired.